introduce participant journey to live operation.
Thanks, Portia. Gosh, good morning, everybody. I was reflecting earlier this morning that it was just short of a year ago that I think I was standing here. And obviously, by the way, I'm Warren. I'm the SRO program manager for delivery post M10. And as I was reflecting, I was thinking about last year this time, we had so many questions, certainly in terms of post M10, loads and loads of questions. We were trying to work out how we're going to manage migration, transition, change management, etc. And so while I was on the train this morning, and it literally was on the train, this hasn't been scripted because I made notes whilst on the train, and you can see train notes because they are hardly readable. So I was basically reflecting in terms of where we were last year, the question. It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
Where we were last year, the questions, and where we are this year. Loads and loads and loads of questions have been answered, without a doubt. We obviously have some questions still to answer. We have some details to put into certain places. Obviously made terrific progress. And then I found myself wondering, well, what questions will I be asking of the program next year? Where will we be next year? And I sort of jotted down a few that I'd be quite curious of where we'll be at this point next year. One, would we have got through ELS on time? Were there any major issues that came out of ELS? Did the governance work? So, did the ELS framework work? Did the IRG, if we're going to go with that, did we have to use that issue resolution group? We should, at this point, be having some of our wave 1 and possibly wave 2 qualification participants just getting ready to qualify, finishing testing, getting ready for governance. Migrations, MPAN's migrated. How many? 5 million. I think that the current view of the migration schedule would say roughly at this point in time it should be 5 million. We can't draw like for like because that was pre-CR 55 and you've got to factor in Christmas and a few other variables, but 4 to 5 million I'd hope we'd be reporting. How has service management gone? How are we working as an integrated service management across industry? Settlement, how's settlement gone? What are the trends looking like? Any issues that are coming out of that? And then, are we operating optimally as a program? And I think that's a key one, and it's a nice segue into this next presentation. Is the nature of the program changes post M10. Right now, it's been very programmatic, and then we kind of get into more like an operational BAU world where we've got same processes running day after day through qualification, the governance, service activation, migration, change, etc., etc., etc. And it's about how optimally are those processes running. And that kind of talks to almost operational excellence, which is a word you'll start to hear us use more and more. So Smither, Jason, the team are right now focusing on operational readiness. We need to get those capabilities ready. But when they're ready, then it's about we need to operate them as best they can, economically, efficiently, effectively, etc. And so, markers are coming in and out.
No, it's quite clear. You're right clear.
Yeah. Keep going. You're all good.
So, no, thanks, man. So, as we're aware, the program so far has been structured into work streams. So we had design and then obviously SIT, qualification, migration, transition, all for good reasons. But we are reaching a point where we need to start to merge those work streams. We need to bring them closer and join them up into a single journey that participants will move through from qualifications through to live, migration, transition, etc. And so we're going to walk you through a really high-level view of that today, joined by various colleagues from the program and industry, and just noting that there's a lot of work happening behind the scenes in terms of at a process level. We need to stitch all these processes together. We need to do walkthroughs. We need to make sure we have the right controls put in place, the right reporting. We're also looking at how do we structure the programs, so the target operating model for the program. how do we structure that internally to better better deal with the challenges that would face in the operational world post go live. So, for example, things like the migration control center that's right now being stood up, technologies being developed, recruiting resources, etc. And there's a few other capabilities that we're looking to stand up within the program to help us better manage the post go live world. So to that point, just a few slides and I'll hand over to my colleagues. So at a really high level, participant journey, readiness for qualification, participants qualified, they're live in the new world, and then the inter-migration and through the transition period. The complexity of this, as you can see, we have several program, industry, and code body capabilities that all need to come together to enable that process to happen and that journey to happen. And that talks to that piece that we're currently integrating those processes and going forward, operational excellence, etc. What does success look like? Obviously, we need participants to commence migration as planned. Once they are migrating, they migrate as planned. No material settlement issues. And ultimately, we need to protect M15. What are we doing about it at the moment? So it's working with all the stakeholders to ensure the roles, responsibilities, expectations are clear. Getting into the processes.
There is something weird going on. Do you want to use the other one?
Okay. Getting into the processes, it's ensuring that those processes are integrated. We have sufficient controls in place to monitor them. We have the right intelligence, so we can focus on what's important. Also importantly, knowing what good looks like is something we're spending a lot of time on, because if all the stakeholders agree what good looks like, then we obviously are all going to head in the right direction together and we can hold each other accountable. Ensuring participants are supported throughout that journey. And lastly, ensuring we have transparency and accountability, because we all are dependent on each other, and therefore we're going to need to be able to hold each other accountable to get to the end of the program. So to facilitate this next slot, we've basically put a very simple matrix together, which covers those four key steps in the journey, and then it has a breakdown of who the stakeholders at a really high level, who's involved, and what are they responsible for doing. And I'm going to hand over to my colleagues in a moment, and they'll each just walk through each of the elements of that segment. As I said, we're getting to the process level, and then we do intend to publish information that will give you that end-to-end view of how it all bolts together, where you find information, where you find support, etc., etc. So that will be coming in due course. Just before I do that, I think we're going to take this opportunity just to allow the DIP team to just do some quick introductions. I believe Jess Davies has just joined as the DIP service owner, so I'll hand it to Jess for a moment, and then I think we'll move to qualification.
Hello. Oh, lots of people. I've been sat in the front and I wasn't able to see everybody. So hello, everyone. I'm Jess. And as it was stated, I'm here to introduce you to the Enduring DIP Manager team. So we're going to be past the DIP at some point in September. Hope it's all very ready and pretty and working. And we will be your enduring team for making sure that the DIP continues to run well and is managed successfully. I will just note here, it's on the bottom of this slide, we are going to hold a Q&A session in May. So that hopefully gets me out of answering too many questions today. What I would like to ask, though, is any questions that you do have, chuck them in Slido, we can filter through them, make sure that they're captured, and make sure that that Q&A session is really tailored to what the audience here would like to see in May. We're also happy to take any direct queries through the Alexon service desk. I believe there's a drop down in there for the data integration platform, so you can direct any queries through there, and one of the team will respond to them, hopefully. So very, very quick one from me. This is all of us, and I hope to speak to you all in the future. And I believe I'm handing over to Laura.
So I'm Laura Kennedy. I'm the workstream lead for qualification. As you all know, the journey for qualification starts way before the final quad. But given how often we cover that, and given the fact that we've got George later this afternoon doing a session on wider qualification and where we are with that status, we thought we'd focus on the end of the process and demonstrate how the approvals that are needed from the DIP manager, the BSc PAB and the Rec Code manager all come together at the end. So what we've done is split out the journey into 3 slides. So you obviously have a slightly different journey if you're in one of the joint roles. So that's the LDSOs and suppliers who need to be qualified by both the BSc and the Rec, or if you're in the BSc only roles or the Rec only roles. There's obviously a lot more differences if you're in SIT, if you're an on-SIT LDSO, if you're coming through the qualification waves, if you're placing reliance, etc. But we've tried to bring together the steps at the end that are common across all of those. So this first journey shows you those joint roles, the supplier and the LDSOs. So you'll be submitting at this point your final quad in the quad portal. This will then be subject to a joint review by the DIP manager team, the BSc and the Rec team. As with the earlier quads, the initial quads, you'll be getting 1 set of comments back representing all of those teams. It is worth saying alongside this, there's obviously lots of other activities. The quad is just one part of it. There will be test completion report reviews. There'll be work off plan agreements, the validation of exemption requests. But in terms of your quad, once this gets accepted by all 3, so the DIP, the BSc and the Rec, we'll be expecting the participants to have a director company sign off. This doesn't actually need to be in the portal. You will need to upload it to the portal, but the director themselves doesn't need to log into the portal to do this. And it is a prerequisite for moving on into that formal qualification. So we would ask that people have those directors ready, queued up, ready to go, particularly the pre-M10, where that's going to be over the summer. So we don't have any delays there. Once the director signs off the qualification assessment document, then you'll move into the DIP manager approval. It's worth saying that even though we are showing confirm that all of the requirements in the DIP rules have been met and that they can approve a DIP user. This will then move forwards into, they will inform the code bodies, and this will move forward into the Rec Code Manager approval and the BSc Performance Assurance Board approval. Once all 3 of these have been, all 3 approvals have been made, then a participant is MHHS qualified, and they will, the code bodies will notify the service activation team. So we have a similar slide on slide 2, but this time it's the data services roles, which are the BSc only. So again, you'll submit your final quad via the portal. You'll need to provide that company director sign off, and then the DIP manager will approve, followed by the BSc PAB. And then again, the code bodies will notify the service activation team. You might guess what's coming, but the third one is the metering service roles. So those are the Rec only roles. So again, final quad. This time it's the DIP manager and the Rec Code manager who will approve, and they will pass it through into the service activation. So we just have a slide with a few more details on each of the steps. What I wanted to focus on was the steps that have the multiple colours. So although this is only showing the final part of the quad, the DIP manager, the Rec team and the BSc team will be working together throughout the whole process. They'll be collaborating together to ensure that this is a smooth and efficient process for all of the participants. They will also be providing joint reporting into the programme and the IPA to ensure that progress is being tracked across for all participants. And as Jason's already alluded to, we work very closely with MHHSP, particularly on the SIT and the non-SIT LDSO participants, looking at the choreography of people coming out of the testing and moving into qualification. We'll also obviously be engaging directly with all of the participants. There's various checkpoints where we'll be providing feedback, you'll be providing information into us, and we'll be making sure that you have everything you need to move through the process as quickly and efficiently as possible. The full timelines for each of the journeys are in the qualification approach and plan, and we also have plan on pages for each journey up on the website. And just wanted to do a final plug for the stalls. I know, Jason, you mentioned the qualification testing framework earlier. We do actually have that set up in the orange room. So anybody who's going through the qualification waves and in the room who would like to go and see a bit more about how the qualification testing framework works, that is in the orange room in the break. And I will hand over, as we will do in the process, to service activation.
Good morning, everybody. I'm new to presenting in this forum, so I'm Karen Lavelle and I head up participant management. And my team, although we're talking about service activation mainly here, my team are also accountable for making sure we deliver the qualification, but also ISD and MDD. So we have got quite a wide range of what we've got to cover. So as everybody else has done, we've got a flow diagram that we're going to talk through. There is detail on the next slide, but I think I'll probably cover it all in this slide, to be fair. So obviously we're working in collaboration with all of the teams across Alexon and Market Hub Valley to make sure that we're working proactively and in collaboration to make sure that this journey is a success for everybody, including ourselves. Our engagement with the participant will happen way before they get to PAB. So the market entry team, who also work in my area, will be talking to the participants about what effective from date they would like to onboard from. The qualification team obviously is in their interest is to make sure that the party qualifies. They'll be working with the participants to make sure that happens and is achieved in the timescales that we've set out. We'll be working with the programme and the migration team to make sure that the participants are ready to migrate. I think it's key to highlight that if there is no qualification or the migration team hasn't agreed to a plan, then we won't enact service activation. Both have to be achieved in order for us to do that. So during service activation, we'll be updating the Alexon systems and the DIP manager system with any of the relevant data that we need to. I'm going to go along the happy path first. So obviously the participant will be informed that they've been promoted to production, and then the participant is added to ISD. Again, if we go across the bottom, so the happy path, the participant will import all the configuration settings required to be able to undip the boards. The DIP manager will make sure that it matches all the success criteria and checks, and then Alexon will publish ISD. As with MDD, there is still a 7-day window between publish and go live. And MDD will be published monthly to match or update as per ISD. So hopefully we publish, the participant will import the data, and then the participant can start trading in Market Hub Valley. Obviously, we've accounted for it in case it doesn't quite go to plan. So if the participant, when they're trying to import their configuration settings, have any issues, then they need to raise a service desk ticket, and that will be managed by service management, who will make sure the right is reached to the right team so they can enact any action that needs to be taken in a timely manner. Again, if the DIP manager success checks don't quite work, it will be the DIP manager that's raising the Alexon ticket. It will inform the participant, and then service management will take over and make sure again it's reached to the right area to get it fixed in a timely manner. If there's any issues with ISD, although we're hoping there won't be because we put lots of validation into ISD, but if there are any issues, again, we would expect the participant to raise a ticket and then be routed to the team to make sure we resolve that within the 7-day window. Again, high level, this is just what I've gone through, and you know there is a lot of work going in the background to make sure that we make sure service activation happens in the time frame we set out, so that people are able to then enact their migration plans. Gary.
Thanks, Karen. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. You would have heard service management reference quite a few times already this morning, and clearly we're going to be the glue that holds everything together. So an integral part of what we need to deliver is delivering the success for this programme, and absolutely we do recognise that. But key takeaway, and we've heard it several times this morning, is that we can't do this alone. It's all about collaboration from our point of view. We need your insight to help inform what we do and how we do it. So hopefully we'll take some of that messaging as we go through the slides this morning. Yeah, as I previously mentioned, we are the glue that holds everything together. So we do need to make sure that we get this right. And it's been referenced, as I said, several times this morning around how do we need to ensure that we actually understand the service we deliver and how we do that on a consistent, high quality basis. One of the key things I wanted to also stress is around what we don't want to do is introduce a lot of change. What we want to try and do is what we deliver is standard service management practices that you actually all know and understand. So we've got a number of design principles. So when we've actually rolled out Service Now, it's really much an out-of-the-box implementation. We're not overly configuring it because we want to make sure that it's the journey that we provide and the underlying process are seamless to you all. So in doing so, we've adopted a standard ITIL version 3 model. It is, there's nothing new in there. And what we want to ensure it's actually easily recognisable for the participants in the industry as we go through that process. One of the other design principles we have is that continuous improvement is embedded in everything we do. We want to ensure that actually we need to evolve, and as we go through the next couple of slides, I want to ensure that you actually understand this is a continuous improvement process. We need to evolve not just how we do things, but also the maturity of our capability as we go through. We also need to ensure that our customer experience is actually the forefront of everything we do. We need to ensure that actually we improve that, we actually understand and we simplify it. And that's where we come through some of the knowledge management processes to ensure that we shift left to actually people actually understand, and making sure that people actually can fulfil the service need at the front end of the process as much as we can. In terms of the service management scope process, we've got 6 core capabilities. We've already stood up the ServiceNow platform, so that's already in place, and we're actually moving new capability and readiness for go live come M10. So a bit more detail in terms of where we are. I think Jason referenced it this morning in terms of a level of right to left planning. And suffice to say, there's a lot of scrutiny on what we do. We do need to recognise that we've got. So whilst we've made significant progress over the last few months to ensure that we're in a good place for go live, we need to ensure that there's quite a few obstacles that we need to jump over, but ensure that we have got the passion, we've got the actual capability in place to make that happen, and absolutely fundamentally believe that. I think it was also referenced this morning around the operations manual service design documents. Many of you would have seen that, and many of you would have input into that. And I think it's also referenced this morning is that when we get feedback, we don't balk at 455 comments. Actually, it really helps inform the documentation we do, helps inform you, give us the insight about how we can improve not just the processes, but also the documentation we improve. So that insight and that feedback is really valuable to us. So thank you for doing that. Those documents are live. They're not something that we're going to sit on the shelf somewhere, so it's important from our point of view to ensure that they're maintained. So that we're going between now and M10, we will be updating them on a monthly basis. And that's important from our point of view to ensure that actually it's accurate, it's maintained, and actually reflects what the go live service will be come September. I think it's also referenced this morning around, we came out of SIT in February, and whilst we started on time, there's significant success as part of that. There were absolutely a couple of defects, and there's some stuff that we need to pick up into. So we need to actually recognise in that. And one of the key points around that was around how we're actually going to manage cross-party service desk interactions. There's a lot of work going on in place at the moment as I stand here in terms of working with a number of people within the room and also virtually about how we best do that. And again, your insight into that is really helping informing the approach we need to take out of that. Consultation is a recurring theme here, and it's in the middle of the slide. It's in the middle of the slide because actually this is what it's all about. It's about collaboration. It's about consultation. We can't do it on our own, and we won't be successful if we don't have the right level of insight, feedback, and collaboration with you all to help inform the ways of working going forward. Operation readiness testing, again, been mentioned before. As we came out of SIT, recognising that we're several months before go live, we need to make sure that our internal processes are fit for purpose. There's some processes changes we're making. We're actually updating Service Now. We've actually done that in the last few weeks. We're about to actually upgrade the platform itself. So what we need to do is make sure that, again, our internal process and the way we work are fit for purpose come September. So we will be speaking to you over the next couple of weeks. I think the question's been asked already around what's our approach for further testing. So the operational testing piece will be probably undertaken around June time, and what we're going to be doing over the next couple of weeks is actually reaching out to you just to actually talk you through what the approach and scope of that piece of work is going to be. Again, what I want to be able to do is sit in front of, we said that there's a lot of scrutiny on service management, and rightly so, and that's understood. But we need to sit down with the colleagues across the programme, with you guys and the IPA, just to actually give them the confidence and the assurance that everything's going to be fine for go live. So from our point of view, I think that next stage of testing is going to be critical to our success. Training, from our point of view, training is the analysis is underway just to ensure that we understand the need. There's a number of streams associated with that. It's not just about service now, it's about business readiness as well. So we're making sure that right across the piece, the upskilling is in place to ensure that, again, that everybody's informed and aware of what needs to happen. The early life support, we will pick up in a moment, but certainly I think Matthew's going to speak a bit more in detail about that. But from our point of view, what we will put in place from a service management point of view is an additional layer, an additional wrap in terms of how we support that, making sure that we provide additional resources, part of additional resources to support that. And we're also making sure that the right level of reporting and dashboards are available to all to inform as we go through and make sure that we make the right decisions. I think I've just got one more slide. I think going back to the point I previously made, this is an incident management process. It's standard what we do. There's nothing new here. So what we want to try and do is just kind of allay some concerns that actually new ways of working is nothing that's going to be news to you all. What we will be doing is put additional assurance around it. So we'll be put in place an additional triage team that's made up from a number of SMEs across the business, just to ensure that we can provide that further level of assurance come go live, and we're making sure that we have the right processes, the right people in place to make sure that we can manage that effectively. I think from that point of view, I think I will hand over to Matthew.
Thanks, Gary. Okay. Hi all, I'm Matthew Breen. I'm the transition lead for the programme, and I'm going to talk to you about early life support. So we've heard today that the early life support model has obviously been out of consultation and it's still under development. So what I would like to do is give you a sort of as-is view of thinking at the moment before there's obviously an update published later this week. So to sort of summarise the purpose of early life support, it's really to set out how the programme will gain assurance that the newly implemented systems and processes are working as expected. Now, because we won't be taking a sort of big bang approach at Go Live, the idea is that we verify that these systems and processes are working as expected, as we gradually increase the number of MPANs that are operating within the MHHS arrangements. So to go a bit of a level deeper and set out, there are 5 things that sort of summarise the purpose of early life support. These are to assure that the new systems and processes are working as expected across the TOM, to assure that the new central systems are performing as expected, to ramp up the number of migrations that are taking place on a daily basis in a controlled manner, and to provide a forum to share overall performance with industry, so industry can review the performance and ask questions or ask queries about performance from all the way across the TOM. And then, most importantly, we'd like to make informed decisions based on performance against a defined set of measures, which will be set out within the early life support model. So just to provide a bit of additional clarity, based on some feedback we had through the consultation, the purpose of the early life support model is not to look at the performance of individual programme participants and not to make it available to wider industry. That's not our intention. And it's also not to set out the means by which individual participants will get support. This is through the service management arrangements that are going to be in place. And to provide a bit of sort of additional clarity, the sort of key focus for early life support is going to be ensuring that the central systems and processes that have been implemented are performing as expected, and to mitigate the risk associated to migrating MPANs into the new arrangements. When we're talking about hypercare, and you hear people talking about hypercare, this refers to the arrangements that each central party, code body and programme participant will have in place to support the resolution of issues that may be encountered at Go Live or when they begin operating in the MHHS arrangements after they qualify. So to sort of give you a picture of how we've or what we've done to come up with a picture of what needs to be looked at to review performance during the early life support period. We've consulted with industry, we've consulted with central parties, code bodies and programme participants. And sort of summarise these, there are 5 areas that we'll be looking at. We'll be looking at service management monitoring, looking at things like the number of incidents that have taken place, whether those incidents are being resolved, and the severity of those incidents. We'll be looking at settlement performance, making sure that the new settlement systems are working as expected, that they're processing data as expected, and that the settlement reports are making their way through to suppliers and LDSOs as expected. We'll also be looking at the performance of the new central systems and making sure both functionally and non-functionally they're operating as expected. And we've worked closely with the code bodies to identify some key business processes from across the TOM that we'll monitor carefully to understand whether there are any systemic issues across the TOM. And then finally, most importantly, I think, we'll be taking input from our colleagues in the Migration Control Centre and looking to understand whether industry is able to deliver against the migration plan that's been set. So, I've mentioned all these performance reporting areas. The idea is that this reporting will be made available to everybody on a weekly basis. And there will also be a number of governance meetings in place where participants can come along and ask questions or query the reporting that's in place. And a key thing is that we'll be asking central parties and code bodies to come along to those meetings to discuss the reporting that's relevant to them and their area of the TOM and answer questions that participants may have. In these meetings, in addition to looking at performance, we'll also provide an opportunity to discuss key issues from across the TOM with experts from across the industry. Now, the idea isn't that we'll be resolving everyone's small issues during these meetings. That is still going to be the responsibility of the service management arrangements and the relevant service management desks. But with that said, where there are major incidents that are being discussed in this meeting or elsewhere, the programme is looking to set up an issues resolution group, as Warren touched on. And this group will bring together experts from across the TOM and look to expedite a fix where required at speed. So on this slide, what I wanted to do is sort of bring to life a little bit more what I mean by these governance meetings that are going to be in place. So the blue circles represent governance meetings that will happen during each phase of the early life support period. And in these meetings, what we'll be looking to do is assess performance, but not just review the monitoring that's in place. We'll be comparing that monitoring to a set of defined performance metrics that are set out within the early life support model and have been agreed upon. And importantly, we'll only be making decisions about moving into the next phase of the early life support period when performance has been proven and we've met the relevant metrics as set out within the document. So that's represented by the red circles you can see on the diagram. That's where we're going to an assurance group to gain approval to move into the next phase of the early life support period. And as mentioned, we'll only go to those meetings when performance has been proven. So to bring that to life a little bit further, I say bring it to life with a table of numbers. Across the top here, what I've put is the maximum number of migrations that will be taking place on a daily basis through each phase of the early life support period. But it's not just going to be a maximum number of migrations on a daily basis. What we're also going to look for is to have a minimum number of MPANs operating within the MHHS arrangements before we exit each phase of the early life support period. But it won't stop there. It won't just be a matter of we have a number of MPANs operating within the MHHS arrangements. It will be this combination of a minimum number of MPANs operating within the MHHS arrangements and performance having met the relevant levels as set out on the previous slide. And the targets will be within the early life support model, which an update is coming for later this week. It's really important to note as well that during this period, the Migration Control Centre and our colleagues in the migration team will be working closely with suppliers and with LDSOs to plan the migration. But when doing so, during the early life support period, they'll be doing so within the framework that's set here. It's also worth noting that the numbers we've set here are based on an assumption that all of the parties going through SIT will be migrating MPANs from M11. If that doesn't prove to be the case, then we'll work closely with our colleagues in the MCC and with those parties that are migrating MPANs at the time to consider whether these numbers need to be revised at all. The final thing to mention through early life, I think, is that the sort of key aim we have for the end of early life is to get to a point where we have a minimum number of MPANs operating within the MHHS arrangements, as set out in the second row, But in combination with that minimum number, we've also proven performance across a number of metrics as set out in the key areas I mentioned a couple of slides ago. And it is only when we have those two things that we will make a decision to move into the next phase of the early life support period, or indeed to exit early life, at which point the migration will be planned in line with the migration framework. So that's all I really wanted to talk about with early life. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. So if we briefly just touch onto migration, I think Keith and Jason alluded to it earlier that the migration framework is almost baselined. We're in consultation 4 at the moment. Closes on Friday, and we're aiming to baseline the framework I think end of April, which is a great achievement. And thanks to MWG, we've done it in less than 12 months. And we started with, obviously, we took up a blank template, so it was a great achievement. We have also created the first version of the migration profile, which hopefully many of you would have seen, which I think included 99.x% of industry MPANs and gave us some really good insight into possible challenges and opportunities for the migration phase, which we have used with MWG to adjust our thinking for that phase. What we're going to take you through now is a very simple illustration for a participant and their journey through migration. If I could probably just focus your eyes on that flow in the center of the slide. So you may recall that we decided to take a sprint approach to migration. So we're going to have 9 migration sprints, highly intentional sprints, which are managed at a daily level. And the way a participant will be allocated to their starting sprint would be based on their migration start date. So this particular participant is going to be starting migration in sprint 4. I'd probably guess they would have been in a wave 1 or wave 2 to have commenced then. And so what will happen is the program will be monitoring that participant's progress through qualification testing, governance, service activation to make sure they're on track to hit that migration start date, which the Migration Control Centre obviously has planned and allocated capacity towards that. So that migration start date is really, really important. And we'll always be keeping sight on that through all the various steps leading up to that. This participant would have then qualified, service activated, and the start migration in sprint 4. They would have also been included in sprint 4's sprint planning. So when it comes to your sprint to start, you then get involved in the sprint planning. Then that participant has obviously continued migrating from sprint 4 through to sprint 8. I won't get into the technicalities of those capacity envelopes and all of those good things. It's probably a little bit too much detail, but there is certainly an expectation on suppliers that once you start migrating, you migrate at pace once you've gone through your ramp-up period. And that's what's currently in the framework is the expectation to migrate 90% of your MPANs within 132 migration days. That does depend on the size of your portfolio. Smaller portfolios have a bit more relaxed. They have the minimus threshold, so you're probably less constrained. But the larger portfolios, we've taken that approach, and that was developed in MWG with yourselves. We have factored in other elements. So if, for example, there's a central system that goes down and participants can't migrate, then we will allocate them additional migration days so that they aren't penalised for issues that aren't in their control. The other key thing to note is the Migration Control Centre will be absolutely key to that process. Obviously, it'll be responsible for the planning, the orchestration, reporting, issue management, escalations, etc. The way we've structured it is there'll be 2 functions. There'll be a front office account management function, and then a back office data intelligence planning function. Now, the front office function will consist of accounting managers. We couldn't think of a more interesting name, so we just call them open for suggestions for title if you want. And so each account manager will be allocated a portfolio of X suppliers. and it's their role to work with their suppliers to help them through migration planning. Once in migration, it's helping them through, if they're having any issues in migration, monitoring them, tracking them, helping, etc. So it's very much a one-to-one relationship that those account managers will have with suppliers. In terms of the readiness of that, Tom, as I alluded to earlier, the tool set has been developed. We did a demo to MWG last month in terms of the portal, so that's progressing nicely, getting ready for dress rehearsal, so that's all moving on quite nicely. Last point to note, and I note it because it's been asked, is the adherence to the migration framework and the migration schedule is a BSc obligation, just FYI, and the regulatory folk will back me up in that because they've given me the text to put in all the documents. So, but obviously we won't have to need that, we won't have to use that, I'm quite sure. Talking about what's expected of each one of us, a slide I've popped in here for each one of the stakeholders. So suppliers obviously submit migration plans, need to achieve their migration start dates, adhere to their plans, notify the MCC if they have any issues while they're migrating or leading up to migration, and managing the agent/service providers. I say all these things, but obviously the program is there to help and support you as best as it can to get you to achieve all of those. In terms of agent service providers, again, achieve your migration start date, well, your service activation date, support, really important, support the migration demand across all of your contracted suppliers, and that's a key element we'll be monitoring from the MCC just in terms from risk, and then again, any early notification of issues. Central parties achieve migration thresholds, you would know those, and also service management. BSc obviously quite key, qualification testing, service activation, service management, settlement, performance, all those good things we're covering here. Code body is obviously the qualification governance process, efficient, effective, transparent, all that good stuff. And then obviously settlement, performance assurance, which Holly will come into in a moment. In terms of what we're on the hook for is ensuring that we have, the same effectiveness and efficiency in terms of sprint planning, sprint execution, providing the right intelligence to the right people. So from the beginning, we said we're going to be as transparent as commercially possible. So the migration portal will offer daily, weekly, monthly reporting. Obviously, it depends on the type of information, but we're going to be completely transparent with the information. And lastly, and it's not on this slide, but it's just about being able to hold each other accountable. And I kind of touched on that on the first slide. So obviously, we are working with our team and the code bodies to look at what happens if we do have deviations from what the responsibilities are. Finally, just what's still to be done. Framework, I've spoken about that. The version 1 of the migration schedule, that'll be baselined at the end of July. So we're going for the next submission exercise, commences end of April. The output of that will be version 1, that'll be baseline. MCC to be operational end of August, and then Sprint 0. Sprint 0 is the ELS phase. That schedule needs to be baseline in October. Pieces of work we're still working on, working with the performance team in terms of how do we manage settlement, risk, and migration. What does good look like? What is not good? How would that impact migration? And then also, again, how do we deal with participants who aren't performing? I think that's it. Oh, sorry, I forgot my co-body friends. This is what, so, Mr. Wallace, I'm doing this for you. Unfortunately, some of our rec colleagues are in the rec pab at the moment, so they've asked me just to voice over this. And I do believe that the rec team had a really effective training day in February, and I think there was also a webinar. And I have heard, I think, should be looking probably doing the same for BSc probably. I don't know, but I've heard a few questions about that. But so basically what they're doing is obviously assurance of suppliers and meter operating agents who are currently live in the market. So it's making sure they've made the required changes. And then once we're into transition and we're into the new arrangements, then REC have obviously made the changes to the reporting catalogue, etc. And they'll be monitoring according to that. If there are any questions, Andrew just say he'll take them and he'll pass them on to the relevant people back at the office and they can get back to us on that. And then I believe Holly.
Thanks, Warren. Hi all. So good afternoon. I'm Holly, Head of Assurance here at Elexon and also Chair of the Performance Assurance Board. So as you can imagine, we've got quite a input into the migration, but I think it's first off pointing out that during the migration period, we will be monitoring both legacy and market-wide arrangements. It's absolutely integral that we ensure that the settlement performance remains stable across both markets. Okay, so any suppliers out there that are hoping, that we will relax some of the performance standards on legacy, that's not going to happen. Okay. Obviously, I put on there that we will look at like holistic tracking per the MPID for settlement performance. So that really looks at energy volume settled on actuals and estimates, and also looking at accurate and limited statuses across the market-wide arrangements. Okay, we will be looking, as Warren mentioned, around indicators for successful migration. So looking at the kind of consistency of MSID count dropping from one arrangement into the next. So there is extensive amount of reporting that has been developed for us to kind of monitor over those two periods, really. And really, we're looking at kind of an increased settlement performance in legacy as final reads are starting to be processed and stuff. So there are quite a lot of indicators for us to make sure that things are going correct, both in the legacy arrangements and obviously then as it starts to migrate into the market-wide arrangements too. Some of the reporting that we've started to develop is known as performance assurance monitoring, or likewise known as PAM, is our new acronym for that one, so a new one for you all to learn. That has actually gone out as a public document, so you can have a look at that online and have a look at all the different types of reporting and the level of granularity that we've got within there. So if you're interested, please do have a look on that one. Get a lot of questions about kind of settlement performance standards, especially over the migration period. What we've actually said is that we won't set fixed targets and fixed standards over the migration period. It's really important that we are flexible over that period and that we're monitoring by the use of kind of thresholds, across the migration. That was kind of set out in a document that also is public. You can find that's called a Migration Performance Standards Approach, and that looks at what the thresholds we're looking at and how we would then deploy things like the performance assurance techniques if we start to see things going wrong. With that, we're basically looking at making sure that your settlement performance remains stable as you go from one arrangement into the next one. Okay. We've obviously heard from Migration Control Centre and obviously the early life support. So we have been working quite closely with them in terms of inputs for settlement performance and how some of those metrics works alongside an indicator if the migration is working and whether we can scale up things like the early life support and the amount of migrations that are happening as well. So we are actually looking at that holistically and we'll be feeding into there. It's worth noting that the performance standards in Annex S1 isn't the only indicator. So we will be working with Migration Control Centre if there is anything that we spot across that monitoring that indicates that something's going wrong with the migration. Okay, so it's not necessarily just about the settlement performance starting to change. There are other indications that we're looking at as well across there. Lastly on there, before I touch on a couple of other things, we get quite a lot of questions about the enduring performance standards. We are obviously developing them. The market-wide standards are set to 100% in both accurate data for smart and advanced segments. But we are looking at how we approach that. So I think just to let you all know that we're looking at kind of applying weighted standards to those just to make sure that we can look at and reflect the more granular data for accurate and estimated volumes that are kind of coming through. Okay, that is actually going out and we're working on it at the minute. And I know any members in here who are part of our new settlement assurance working group might have already had kind of a first look of that as well. So keep your eyes out for that because there'll be more information that will come in the next couple of months on the new enduring settlement performance standards and our approach to that one. Okay. I'm just going to address a couple of the other comments and I guess the wraparound assurance that we've been working on really across the last year and a bit really. So there's a couple of questions about reverse and forward migration. It is a brand new process, so we have put quite a lot of assurance rigor around that one just to make sure it's working correctly. We did publish an EAR at the end of last year, so an assurance information request out to, I think it was 24 participants with the largest market share, just to make sure that we were checking checking around their readiness for those processes. And the good news, they all came back and said, yes, they will be ready in time. Obviously, we've also started to develop more assurances around that. So for any kind of suppliers out there, we will be following up on that across the board in the next couple of months, just to make sure that is tracking ready, and it's ready for obviously the M10 go live. The other things that we've got on there is the BSE audit. We run that annually every single year. This year won't be any different. We will still be running that come September, but we will look at kind of splitting it into two different ways. So really looking at running the BSE audit for legacy arrangements, but also looking at it from a market-wide perspective for those who have started to migrate. That saying, we understand the amount of time and effort that's going in from everyone across the industry. So we really, really don't want to overburden all parties when they're also trying to go through one of the large transitions we've got. Okay, so that's really just a nod to me to say I know what it's going to take for us as an industry, and we are trying to work with all parties around that, but also provide that level of assurance that we need. And the last one that I just wanted to mention as well is we are also working to make sure some of the changes for P434, which is the UMS or unmetered supply migration to half hourly, is also kept up to date as well. So that was a kind of a precursor to M10 to make sure that we're migrating those unmetered supplies to half hourly. So anyone who has unmetered supplies, we also will be following up and providing a layer of assurance on those ones too. I think I've covered everything, and I'm passing over to Andrew next.
Thank you very much. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Andrew Morgan. I'm part of the SRO senior leadership team, and today I'm giving you an update on change governance. So what is changing, why is it changing, and when? So change governance is changing at M8, M10. And what do we mean by that? Effectively, if you want to make a change to the design at the moment, you've got to raise a programme CR. And at M8, M10, that design will have been translated into code, and that MHHS text would have then gone into, from the programme governance, into code body governance. So if you want to affect the design in any way, instead of raising a programme CR, you will need to raise a BAU modification. So therefore you need to engage those code bodies. So what does that mean for you as participants? That means that instead of raising that programme CR, you're engaged with the code bodies and you will go through the normal BAU process, and effectively you will raise modification and amend that text. What does that mean for the programme? Well, the programme's relationship and behaviours will need to change. We will need to consider ourselves as any other participant in the programme, and we will need to engage with the BAU change process so that if there are any changes out there, our primary objective will be ensuring that we protect the programme deliverables and we ensure that we don't impact any of the programme milestones. If we do, we will be proactively engaging through the work groups, through the panels and through the consultations, where effectively we'll be ensuring there are no delays to the programme deliverables. As a backstop, if anything does go wrong, and it will have to go seriously wrong, our backstop is we will escalate this to Ofgem and ask them to intervene. But we are working collaboratively at the moment with all the code bodies to work out what that process is to ensure that we don't have to engage Ofgem and that doesn't happen. Oh, sorry. And yes, and to mitigate the risk of any problems, the BSC have already made changes to their governance framework around their CP process, and there's also a new MHHS expert group which we've started engaging with. The same with the DIP manager. They've set up their primary change decision group, which is TCAB, and again we started to attend those meetings and we're starting to attend those. And also REC have made several, well, they haven't made any changes. Their processes are already in place to protect the SCR that Ofgem have got there. So what does this mean going forward and next steps? There are deferred CPs, which the programme have already engaged with the code bodies and the proposers to say that those CPs won't be progressed under the programme governance anymore. But if parties want to, they would need to engage with the code bodies and raise them under the code governance. And there's also engaging with the code bodies over the urgent and fast-track change process. So this is where if we need to implement a code change quickly because something's come out of the woodwork, then effectively, yes, we've got a very fast-track change process which will be needed before M8 if we need something just in time, and also probably very important during the early life support period where we need to have that urgent fast-track change process. Okay, I think that's me.